Alright. What the hell? That ain't no G body. Yeah, that's right. Old lady's 79 Bronco 460 C6 NP205 driveline. Swamped it last year. Ended up blowing the transmission, so couldn't find no real good videos on ripping out a tranny on one of these things, so that's what we're going to attempt here. Pretty sure that's the NP205 transfer case. C6 transmission, and it looks like it's got a real long tail housing on it. I just found that out because I bought this transmission and it's short. It was actually that transfer case, and then a 460 sitting under that tarp over there was all together for 400 bucks, so I couldn't complain about that. I thought it would be a good tranny for this, and it's not. Anyways, let's get to the transmission removal video, because when I watch videos I just want to see what the fuck I need to do to get it out, and this does not look like it's going to be fun. Although this is a lifted, body lift and suspension lifted Bronco, so it's going to be much easier than you guys doing it on a stock Bronco or stock height Bronco or anything like that. So alright, let's get at it. Okay, first thing I did here is chalk the tires, put her in neutral, pull the drive shaft, got 4 1/2-inch bolts on the U-joint at the back here, and then 4 7/16 nut bolts on the front of the drive shaft there at the back of the transfer case. Pull that off. I'm going to get a 7/16, pull the speedometer cable deal out. Get that up out of the way. Alright, front drive shaft off. 5/16 12-point wrench only because of this on the transfer case end, and then I had to use a wrench as well for that end, and it was 1/2 inch. So it seems like every U-joint has a different size. Now I'm going to take off the 4-wheel drive shifter linkage. Just going to undo that little guy with some pliers, which I've already loosened, and that bolt holding the whole mechanism on, which I used inch and 1/8. So I already got this loose. This is all loose. You could tie up your shifter knob if you don't want it to fall down. Alright, so now I've unhooked the carb linkage bar. I don't know if this is the equivalent to a GM's kickdown, but it's just a little clip. Linkage comes down, another C-clip. I can pop that off. That just goes up to the handle. I'll have to get the rest of it off. Okay, back on the shift linkage, so 2 9/16 bolts. Pull this linkage bracket off. I've already loosened everything just for the video here. Let's turn that. It just kind of slides off. Pull that out of the way. Then you got a little rubber bushing thing in here. This is the actual linkage to the transmission shifter. Just kind of pried it out of there. You can see that shifts the gears. So just pry that out of there. And now I'll figure out how to get this piece off. Something to do with that. So if you follow this shift linkage bar over, There, it joins right there with the rubber bushing and whatnot. I've tried to pull on it, I don't want to break it. There's 2 bolts there holding the whole bracket assembly on. 1/2 inch there. And 9/16 on top. This one, because it has a body lift, is going to be much easier to get to those, so I'm going to pull the whole assembly off rather than forcing that shift linkage rod off. I don't want to break anything, so I'll have a look at it after. Okay, so there is that shift linkage unit all pulled out. The 2 9/16 nuts on top with the 1/2 inch bolts. And I cleaned it up a little bit to have a look at what I was fighting with there. And if you look closely, you can see on both sides there's a little press mark, so that little bushing, you can see there, it's kind of ovaled, has been put on there and then crimped on. Have to get that out of the way, otherwise your trans will be hitting it on the way out. Just be an obstacle in your way. And then, with the battery unhooked, I'm going to pull the starter. There's 1 bolt here, 1 bolt up there. Then you got your power to do when you get it down. Hopefully your tranny lines are in your way. Pull that out and unhook the power. So, turns out the little positive for the starter is a 3/8. For some reason my starter bolts were both 14mm. I think normally they're 1/2 inch. And I just realized I wanted to keep the starter in so that I could turn the engine over to get to the torque converter bolts. But I might have to just turn it over by the crank, or put a screwdriver on the flywheel and trying to turn it over like that. We will see. Or I could be putting this back in. Now, there's that little plate there for the access to the torque converter nuts. Bolt there, both 3/8. Take that off. So now that little plate's off, you can get in there to get at the torque converter bolts or nuts. I've already taken my starter off. At this point, you can, if you have your starter in, you can just quickly turn the key or have someone do that while you're down here and watch for the bolts and then get at them that way. Or what I do lots is I get a little pry bar and I just turn it over like this. Yes, it's slow, but you don't have to get out, and it works. So you do it that way. There's one coming right there. Hard to do watching the camera and the tool. So then there's my first one. Or you can go up front to the engine and put a long breaker bar with the right socket, 15/16 on the crank nut, and you can turn the engine over like that. If you got a lot of compression, you can take your plugs out and that'll make it a lot easier to turn over. Yeah, but then you have to get out from underneath, do it, and come back. So this way I can lay here and get all the bolts at once while I'm here. And the torque converter bolts or nuts should be 14mm. And there's 4 of them. Alright, the next step is going to be getting this cross member out, the transmission cross member. So we got 11/16 nuts here, backed by 5/8 on the bolt. So 1, 2, because they connect through to the cross member. 3, 4 on the other side. And then you look up in there, up on the top of the frame rail. Anyways, you can kind of see it up there. It's not focusing, but there's one there and there's one more on the other side. I don't know the size of those yet. And then same deal on this side. So there they are. There's the other two. They look like they're going to be probably 5/8 backed by 9/16 on the top. It'll be something like that. And you should be able to get them on the top side of the frame rail. Get a wrench in there. Hopefully you got room. And then we got 4 here, which are going to the transmission cross member plate there. They're 14 mil nuts on the bottom. Looks like about the same on the top. So we're going to pull those 4 out. And then you should be able to jack up the transmission at the transfer case and then bang this cross member out this way. Who knows with what kind of exhaust configuration you have, but that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, so I got the top 2 cross member bolts out, the bottom 2 ones. The bottom 2 are 5/8 and 11/16. The top ones, I don't know, this side was 1/2 inch, I believe, and 14 mil or 14 mil on both, but this thing's been taken apart so many times, who knows. Anyways, jacked up on the transfer case. Those 4 bolts that were holding that transmission mount plate are taken out and it's up. It's got the cross member, so it's loose. So I'm gonna use the old hammer, beat it out until it falls down. That top lip up there, you should watch your fuel line. It's up in there. You don't want to end up smashing it into your fuel line. And you got brake lines up there and wires, so just be careful and work it out. It's quite free, but it isn't as nice as you'd like it. Getting close to that fuel line up top. Or no, that's something else. Coming out not bad. To the point where you can drop it down. Twist it. Oh, it's catching my exhaust there. There she goes. Transmission cross member out. Now I will let some weight off of the whole unit, giving me a lot more access on the top of the transmission to get those bolts and the bolts on the top of the transfer case, because I'm going to drop the transfer case before I drop the tranny, possibly. I don't know, I might try and do them together. Would be nicer to not have to do the bolts on this, but we will see. Okay, so I forgot there's one step I missed here, only because my bolts weren't in there, but On the driver's side here of the transfer case, you can see there's 2 holes for bolts that should be going through to the transfer case on the NP205 anyways. So those will have to be pulled out before you can lift or raise your transmission off of the cross member. Also looks like there's one big one going through that you could possibly take out and releasing the whole bracket and everything from it, but I think the best way to go would be taking those 2 bolts out, which I'm surprised this didn't even have them in it. But yeah, that's a step I missed before you can lift or raise your tranny and transfer case. Well, now I'm gonna undo that bolt there for the bell housing. It's also got the transmission dipstick hooked into it. There's 6 bolts, so I got the tranny hanging nice and low so that I can access these bolts a lot easier. I got every extension in the house. Bunch of extensions, knuckles if you need be. Get up there, get those upper bell housing bolts. So I would normally leave that one in and that guy in, the 2 lower ones, because they're easy to get when the transmission's up higher, and undo that one and that one up on the corner there. But it's already out, so I'm going to go ahead and get the upper bolts out. I'm just going to leave these 2 in for now to keep the trans bolted up, and then I'll get it supported how I like it. Undo those 2 and move it back and drop it down. And there's also 2 bolts on the engine plate that go through to the bell housing, one right there, all weird, which is stripped, and one right there. This plate is tucked in behind the flywheel, so it has to be unbolted from the transmission. Make sure you get your vacuum line unhooked. There's a hard line that goes all the way up to the top of the engine right here. So I'm going to unhook it and drop the whole hard line down with the transmission. Transmission that's out, so it comes up, then there's this clip that looks like it's bolted onto the back of the housing, tail housing. Comes up. And then I'm going to unhook the tranny cooler lines. This one has splices in the lines, so I can leave short parts of the hard line bolted to the transmission. Haven't done it yet because I didn't want transmission oil dumping while I'm working under here. So we're going to do those. If you don't have the splices, then you'll have to unhook it up there. And then the other one is right here. A little bit farther up, harder to get to, but this is going to make it easier, and oil will drain. Transmission all as one. Right now I just have back into the transfer case supported. I moved my jack up farther. I'm going to support under the transmission mount and under the front of the transmission pan. I think that's going to balance the weight out okay with the transfer case back there and the front of the trans up there. I'll get my last 2 lower bolts on each side and wiggle the transmission back. Hopefully it balances and I can lower it down. As the jack comes down, the transmission comes forward. Okay. Should have left it farther forward. The lines, which are going to hit the ground probably. Oh, that's the keys. So the top of the bell housing is hitting the flywheel, still slowly coming down. Slightly off balance because of this transfer case, but in my opinion, beats taking it out under here like this, having tranny oil leaking everywhere. There we go. Got the stick, watch it doesn't catch on stuff. Oh, don't forget to unhook your neutral safety switch. Right there, the wires go up. They hook up right here. We've had a bit of a fire in this thing, so our plug is melted, but there's a plug there I have to cut off, which I forgot to do. All right, it's all out together. Now I can unbolt that transfer case easily.